Okay, 6:10, I'll call the meeting to order. Okay. Consent agenda, previous minutes. Any questions, concerns on those? Entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Sarah's made the motion. Elijah? Elijah says yay. Sarah?
Aye.
Devin?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Okay.
We do have one visitor on Zoom.
Okay. I see her. Okay. Okay, then policy, we have none for first read. Second read, we have E2 and E6. E2 is the grants and E6 is conflict of interest. Any discussion on those? Okay, entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Sarah's made a motion. Elijah? Aye. Elijah's an aye. Sarah?
Aye.
Devin?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Okay, recognition of visitors. I know we have one on Zoom. And
Hi there.
hi.
Hey, Shauna.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
So I am here, Lynn, and if Matt Webb is in the room, he is aware as well. I had made a request a few months ago, kind of been going back and forth, regarding the Dairy Center fields. I worked with the Luke Gates Foundation to get those fields completely redone last spring. Actually, this spring. The softball field is now a fully skinned dirt field, and the baseball field is redone as well. The Luke Gates Foundation
sunk a considerable amount of money in, and we were extremely grateful. But the fields, as you know, are privately owned, but utilized by the Little League. And now that the softball field is skinned the way it is able to be utilized by the middle JV and varsity softball teams, as well as kind of an overflow field. The Little League dimensions aren't any different for softball than what the regulation field is out here at the high school. So it's great that the fields are done, but honestly, they need to be maintained. And I am also working with the select board and the town recreation department. And I don't know, Lynn, if any of my email anybody has seen any of that other than yourself and Morgan and Matt?
No, I have not shared it with the board.
Okay, so essentially, you can't really rely on volunteers to maintain those fields. They really need to be professionally done once a year, edged, weeded, conditioned, so on and so forth. And so my hope, let me back up. The estimate that I received from the gentleman who also does work on the high school fields here and who did the work on the Little League fields was $5,500. So my hope was that the town and the school would budget to share that cost for annual fall maintenance. The volunteers don't have the tools, don't have the knowledge, and honestly, the volunteer pool is completely different than it used to be. And I'm not speaking ill of those people who do volunteer, but it's just different. There's not the amount of people that there used to be. The select board and the rec department are very have not said no. They are very curious if the school would support it as well. But I am getting a positive feeling from them. They know that I was, that I've been kind of presenting this information. I know it might be an odd request because they're privately owned fields, But I'm hoping if there's buy-in with the town as well, given the students that could utilize it from the middle high school and the elementary school, students that utilize it. And it not only, it's very central. And so as the Little League program changes and evolves, you might see, other area, we have combined teams, so other kids from other towns too. Anyway, so that's kind of my request. I was hoping that somewhere you might be able to find $3,000 or so in your 2024 budget to share, contingent upon the town, of course, also sharing in that cost.
Sean, confirm, I pulled your message back up, the original one I think you sent to, yes. So I think it was $5,515 as quoted.
Yes. I was rounding.
But it looked like it was gonna end up being 4,500. Is
Well,
that right?
that was if he was gonna do, so nothing happened this fall just because it didn't happen. So I don't have what you're looking at in front of me, Lynn. I just brought the October 24th. I think the 5,500 is the accurate estimate that he gave me. The 4,500 might have been if he were to do some minimal work this fall. But the full work he estimated at 5,500.
So to confirm, you're asking for half of the 5,500
Yes.
to come out of the school district, and half would be paid for out of the Enosburg town budget?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, the rec department would add it to their field maintenance. So this gentleman also is contracted with the town to do the field maintenance at the rec field at the fire station.
Okay, Matt, how much are the fields used for high school sports?
So I asked my athletic director today, and he said that, actually, let me look for sure. He said that they're only used for softball because they are not, the dimensions are not for baseball. And
Correct.
he didn't know, hi Shauna, I'm Matt, by the way. He didn't know if middle school softball had used them at all last year. And he believed high school used it for practice about 2 to 3 times last year and not for games.
Yes.
Does that sound right, Shauna?
Yeah, so it would never be used for a game like that. That is not the intent. In my mind, so to answer your question, yes, that's correct. So the fields were finished towards kind of the end of May. He got a late start in redoing them, so they weren't really fully available for the seasons, but the high school softball team did practice on them. There is also going to be the installation of a batting cage there in the spring. I'm working with the Little League.
I've applied for a grant to help them to install the batting cages again down there. There was significant drainage done to the field. And I spoke with Phil Robtoy, who does the mowing, and he said that that it was good this year. Even with all the rain that we had, there weren't any issues with water like there have been in the past. So the thing with the field here, and I have a little bit of experience because I do help coach the varsity team. Once games start, we've got middle school, JV, and varsity sharing a field. So a game starts at 4, they get out of school at 3, Mike has already lined the field. So really, you might get a quick infield on a lined field, and then maybe you hop in the batting cage, and then you've got to go, maybe down to the soccer field and do some things. But it's not a very efficient practice. Whereas you could just go to the Dairy Center and have a full practice there on game days. I do think it would be utilized.
How would I'm just curious that, like, how did they get there?
How would,
The
so
teams.
Right.
I think
right.
like middle school, for example, if they're practicing later, you know, like now they have to practice after a game, or they have to practice after the JV and the varsity practice, so they're practicing late, so they're getting rides to the high school. So I would say they would just get rides there.
So for middle school, that the parents would just drop them off at a different time.
Yeah, at a different place.
So
usually.
So when you and I spoke, Shauna, the place where I went in my mind was, although you know I'm a huge supporter of Little League, I think you were with me when we started a committee together years ago around Little League. The tricky part is Little League is not a school-sponsored sport, so that typically runs through local town recreation departments. So that's where my thinking originally went. I think you do have a precedent in Richford. There's a rec field that the high schools use, and they use that for both softball and baseball. They do have Little League on one field, but both the high school, the middle school, softball and baseball are played there. So there is a financial contribution to the town for that. So I don't know if you want to share the contribution.
It's $1,500 a year when the town remembers to invoice us. So there's been a couple of years when they haven't, and I assume, well, it may have been because of COVID and perhaps they weren't being used, but.
And not the Enosburg, just Richford.
Correct. Correct.
So I think that one of the things that I think Shauna is communicating is that it hasn't been used a lot in the past, but it also wasn't in the condition that it is now. And having that be a skinned infield does provide a different opportunity. So I wonder if you want to consider a contribution, and you can determine what that is. And if you want that to be something that you revisit, you can either decide we're just going to do that, or do you want to revisit it again next year to determine how much did the field get utilized?
Any conversation on that?
So I have one question, and it may have been addressed before I got here, but how was the amount proportioned, right? So I know you said 3,000, Shauna. Can you give us some context around the thought process of, you know, how the ask for the school was 3,000 versus the total amounts?
So it's basically, I was looking for the town and the school to just split the cost, just an even split.
Oh, so it's
On 3,000, that's on the high side. It was 55-15 was the estimate that I was given.
Okay.
And no money from the Little League? Do you get no money from them?
So, the Little League, honestly, they have paid in the past for dirt. They are not charged to use the fields. I mean, it's basically the funds that are paid for, pay for uniforms, pay for insurance, so there's not necessarily a lot left over. I'm kind of out of the Little League as of this year, so I don't know where things were left. They may be able to contribute a small amount, but they definitely don't have the coffers to contribute a large amount.
I think the more we get the kids off the streets and on the fields, the better. I make a motion.
Is there anything?
Well,
Okay. Elijah? I think we lost him.
And I don't think you need a motion.
Okay.
We'll just
I need a motion.
want your intent as we go into the development of the budget.
Okay. We'll talk about it and we'll let you know.
Okay, that's fair, I appreciate it, and once I have, some feedback from you, then I can go back to the town and share that with them as well. Like I said, I felt very hopeful when I left there that, that they were on board understanding kind of, the use of the field and so on and so forth, so.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shauna.
Yeah, thank you. I very much appreciate the time and you guys considering this. So thanks so much.
Okay, do we need to reprioritize anything?
No.
No, okay. That brings us to the school spotlight. Kelly?
Okay. I have Carolyn Hansen, Abby Gray, Leslie Dumas, and we're going to talk to you about Leader in Me. So I talked to you earlier this year, or spring, I forget now which, about Leader in Me. And so they are here to talk about how they have, as classroom teachers, been working with students and kind of what they're seeing. So this is the year, last year it was all about staff becoming familiar with Leader in Me. This year it's about the students. So take it away.
Oh, you're coming to stand with me? All right, so I'm starting us off, and I'm sort of talking to you about what Leader in Me has been like as a teacher, and then they have different parts that they're going to bring to you as well. Last year, as Kelly was saying, we did the adult version, and we learned as adults the 7 habits of a highly successful person. It was really impactful as an adult. I felt like I left with a lot of things that I wanted to try and wanted to change in my own life. Then I started teaching it this year. Leader in Me is an incredible program. It has changed me as much as I think it's changing the students in my classroom. And I think what makes it valuable is it's a whole human, lifelong program. It's not something that is teaching addition and subtraction, and yeah, you'll use it for the rest of your life, but does it change your life? Sort of. Leader in Me does change your life. It has completely changed my language to the point where I am using it with people who don't know Leader in Me, and they're like, what are you talking about? So the program is really easy to teach to the students. It's laid out in a way that it starts with a learning target. We start immediately, the kids know that day what we're learning, what their plan is for the day, how they're gonna end their day. And then it has really kid-friendly videos. It has turn-in talks already built in, questions to ask. They come with a little notebook companion where they are taking notes and setting goals for themselves, doing activities. It's just an incredible program. I think the biggest thing for me has been I'm learning right alongside the students, which has been really amazing. I feel like I'm learning about big rocks and small rocks and how I need to prioritize my own life, and thinking about 30 years ago, if I had been learning the same thing, how much it would have changed the last 35 years of my life. It's a really incredible program. It's not a social emotional program. It's a whole human, lifelong, successful being program. And I think we're at 50 something days in the program, and my students have learned how to set goals for themselves, why we have learning targets, and how we strive to meet those learning targets. We've made mission statements for ourselves, so how we want to be seen by others, what characteristics we want to be seen as having, and how we're going to get there, and how that affects others. And then recently, we've been learning, like I said, about, it's called Put First Things First, and it's about big rocks and small rocks, and how we have to decide what our priorities are. Those are our big rocks, and we do those first, and then the little rocks come next. And the language is just so friendly for 6-year-olds, but it's transferable to the older students as well, and it's become a language we hear throughout the entire building. Everybody's using it, and it's really amazing. The last thing I want to end with before I pass it off to Abby is I actually used it recently I had a meeting with a parent on their tardiness of their student, and we met for quite a while, made a plan, talked about how can your student be successful in coming to school on time. And then we pulled the student in, and that was the exact conversation we had. What are your big rocks in the morning? And she was able to identify, my big rocks are getting dressed, brushing my hair, brushing my teeth. I said, okay, what are your small rocks? She's like, well, playing with my kitten, watching TV, playing on my phone. I said, okay, so your big rocks are first. You absolutely have time for your little rocks, but not until your big rocks are done. And today's the first day, but she was here on time. So hopefully that, you know, and I asked her, I said this morning, did you put your big rocks first? She said, yep, I got dressed, and then I brushed my hair, and then I brushed my teeth, and then I got my breakfast. So this program is really neat because it's creating successful humans, and it's making these students responsible for their own learning, their actions, why they do what they do. And these lovely ladies have some student examples to prove that.
So Leslie is a first grade teacher, Abby is second, and Caroline is third, just for context.
Do you want to do student videos or the structure?
Whatever you want to do.
I'm gonna do student videos since we just talked about
Student videos. Please play my Flipgrid. So, little background is I put together a Flipgrid for students to interact with, and Abby's students and my students made this small video for you.
Leader is important because it teaches you about the 7 habits. I am a leader by being proactive and taking responsibility for what I did. I can be a leader to put first thing first and prioritize and put the most important thing first. Hello, my name is Baker. I am a 2nd grader, and I'm here to teach you guys about habit 4. Okay, I'm gonna start. At recess, our class uses think, win, win with Gaga Ball. If someone gets out and they pout, that is not think, win, win. It will slow down the game. If someone gets out and they jump out of the pit, it is think, win, win, because everyone else can keep playing.
Hi, my name's Grace. And this is about Leader in Me is important because if you didn't know, you wouldn't know rules. Important to have a responsibility. If they didn't have Leader in Me, they wouldn't chant think, win at Gaga Ball, and they wouldn't have good manners. We wouldn't have Spirit Week, and to use synergy and always to be kind.
Hi, my name is Peyton, and I'm in 2nd grade, and I'm here to teach you about leadership jobs. Leadership jobs are an important part for every grade. Every leadership job makes the teachers have more time to teach students. Leadership jobs mean a lot to me because it makes our class on time on everything.
Hi, my name's Loudon. I'm a 2nd grader. Let me tell you all about the circle of control. Did you know there is a circle, 2 of them? There is some inside, some out. So like this is how if you thinking it was sunny, but it is raining. So the weather is outside the circle of control. Thank you for listening.
And that, friend, is the last one. So it's really nice to hear students throughout the hallways, in our classrooms, in after-school program, talking with Leader in Me language. I'll be sitting with ASP and I'm like, oh, you know, what are some of your big rocks what was some of your big rocks today? Did you accomplish them? Or how are you going to sharpen the saw? How are you going to take care of yourself when you go home tonight? And they're like, well, I think I'm just going to sit and play video games. Or I do a 4th and 5th grade cooking night on Thursdays, and I've had several students be like, this is how I'm sharpening my saw. I get to be at after school program. I get to do cooking. And I was like, that's great. So hearing students use this language just reinforces for us as teachers that this is not only just life changing for adults with these 7 habits, but starting when you're 5 and 6 years old is just going to create habits for them that are going to lead them to be successful adults.
And just to add to that, that was scripts that students wrote themselves. Caroline and I gave them some prompts and some ideas, but they kind of just took it and ran, and they recorded it. And this was the first time that my students used Flipgrid. I think the same for you.
Same.
And it really gives students an independence piece and a proudness. And I think what we're trying to get out of using Leader in Me at our school is just students being proud to come from Richford Elementary School, and just trying to change mindsets, what Caroline was talking about. So the whole structure, what Kelly was saying last year, was mainly staff just trying to learn the language, getting used to it, applying it to their own life. So this year we can kind of put it out to the students. Can you pull up that little? Here's a flow chart of what Leader in Me looks like at our school. The neat part about it is every staff member has to be on some team, and they have a choice of what team. Ooh, that's new.
Well, that's for the video. That's
Beautiful
video.
That's perfect. So the structure is that every staff member has to be on a team, and they get a pick of what team that they wanted to. So up at the top we have 2 lighthouse coordinators, myself and Anna Tracy. And what our job is to delegate between the 3 teams. Right now we're just working with the leadership team and the cultural team, and within that is split down into what goals they're trying to do for the year, and then the academic team will try to do and deal out next year. So we're still thinking with the end in mind, and we have that place, and we're getting ideas for the academic team for next year. But really this year we have a leadership team, which is how we can get families more engaged with our school, as well as a leadership piece of how students can become leaders within the school. The cultural team, they focus on staff. It used to be the Sunshine Committee, which Caroline was a big part of. That kind of got absorbed. So it's restructuring systems that we already have to fit our big rocks, our goals. And the cultural team also has a student section as well. And then the yellow boxes are the goals for each of the teams.
Can I piggyback on the cultural team, is that we had a lot of systems in place. We had our celebrations committee, we had our sunshine committee, we had Spirit Week, we had field day, and it's all these little teams and like little pairings of people, with adults being able to choose within their like what team they're on. They then got to go where their genius was. My genius is the sunshine committee, and so I was the cultural group. Which a lot of for some it looks like having meals. Today we just did a celebration for our programs here at school, so we had a cake, and that was my genius. I was online ordering the cake, I had it picked up, it was all set and ready to go. Whereas there's other members on my team who are, my genius is taking notes. I am a note taker, and I'm like, great, that is not mine. And so being able to see where other adults' geniuses are, it's really nice to see as well.
And we even tried to tie Leader in Me as much as we can within our school. We had a Spirit Week maybe about a month ago, and each day was related to a habit. So that way we're practicing in fun ways. I'm blanking on some of the examples that we had.
Synergize, which was class colors. We had Begin with the End in Mind, which was dress what you want to be when you grow up.
Sharpen your saw, something that makes you, sharpens your saw.
Yep. We had lots of teachers dress in snow gear.
It's just kind of a culture and just getting used to the language and, just kind of incorporating staff and students as much as we can into this.
One day Abby sent me a video, she was on recess duty, and the kids were in the Gaga Ball pit, and if you know anything about kids and playing games, it can go wildly awful in a hurry. And they were chanting win, think win, win to each other. And they're a sweet group of kids anyway, but they're just it's neat to hear, like, the kids kind of use the language.
That's awesome. It's so exciting to hear where you are. This is the end of year, or well, this is the middle of year 2.
Yeah.
Correct?
We're in what they call core one.
What's that?
We're in what they call core one, so last year was like just the staff, and then we started rolling out to
Just
students, so
kids.
core one.
And then how many years out to full implementation?
It depends
Well-
on the school and how fast they go. So it really depends on what we're trying to do. So it's kind of vague on how many years per se. It's not like an X amount.
Okay.
And then when you meet certain sort of mile markers, you can become a lighthouse school.
So
We are well on our way.
I want to just say that Kelly knows this. In 2020, right before COVID, I was in San Diego at a National Superintendent's Conference, and my pre-conference institute day was at a military base in a Leader in Me lighthouse school, and it was incredible to walk into that school. I got to visit classrooms all day. The kids literally led the entire day. No adults were taking the lead throughout the day, and to be able to watch this start to evolve here is really exciting, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. I love all of your enthusiasm. Thank you so much for coming out and sharing that with
It feels
us.
like a very worthwhile use of our time each day.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll chime in and just say, I came from a Leader in Me school in Texas. I think I mentioned this to you before, Kelly. And I'm so impressed by the program, and I'm excited that we have it here. You know, there's, in addition to what you guys shared, there's so much evidence-based information, studies, et cetera, about just the impact and the leadership skills that translate from that program. And sometimes I still find myself saying to my son, like, first things first, you know, because like you said, the language translates into daily life, if you pick up on it. So I guess my question is this a pilot? Maybe this is for you, Lynn? Are we thinking about rolling it out to the other schools in the district?
So they're definitely the pilot, and this is something that we have not mandated that all of the schools are going in this direction, but they're getting to the place where I want to start seeing them share outside of here. Like, I would love to do a spotlight on this when it comes to your school for the community and the staff newsletters, and think about ways that we could highlight this with other schools, because I think once we get this moving in this direction, I think others are going to see the connection to the work we're doing and see, either through visiting or hearing from you, how powerful this could be in their schools. So that's the hope, but we're trying to be careful what to say we have to do and what schools, like, this wasn't something that Kelly was told, you have to do this here, but, you know, we certainly had these conversations about what this could be.
And so I guess a piggyback question, are there comparable or similar programs in some of the other schools, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I don't think you could compare it to this. I think that there are other things that other schools have in common, and even RES has in common, more like responsive classroom sort of practices, but it's not this. It's not.
And we still do responsive classroom practices.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this doesn't replace anything by any means, it just, right? Like
It
doesn't replace
is not,
anything.
so
It's
like,
not.
my first year teaching here 4 years ago, we had just rolled out the zones of regulation. And that is an SEL, a social emotional learning program. This is not anything to do with social emotional learning, while it is all encompassing of being a core human and having those skills. It's really more teaching the habits to be successful. Okay, you can have your self-regulation skills, but now what are you going to do when you're in that green zone? What are you gonna do to be successful? How can you go beyond just staying in place?
And that being said, like, there has been some alignment between Leader in Me and Second Step for and our social emotional learning priority standards. And I think one of the things I talked to the staff about, and one of the things I was talking to Callie about was, I think when people think SEL, they often think counseling, mental health. Like,
Yeah.
that's not what, it's social skills. as well. And some of those social skills are how do you self-regulate, right? How do you use executive functioning skills? How do you plan your big rocks so you can actually then go socialize with your friends because you've gotten the other things done that need to get done.
So this is rooted in Stephen Covey's work.
Yes.
Where we've had this conversation about other leadership trainings that we've had as adults, and you know how just impactful the work is really for all ages. So it's very exciting to see.
I feel like I'm more successful human teaching it to my kids. I think about things intentionally.
That's great.
And I like the way you see it, because I agree, and that's why I asked the question about SEL, because there's the potential to layer it in with any other program, right? So there's not well, we can't have this because we have this, because it's just, it's really, really a great program, so, okay.
I'd be curious to know how you incorporate the rest of the staff, so the non-teacher staff, and then also, given the high turnover that we have up in this part of the state in general, how do you bring new teachers into this intentionally each year?
So that's part of the job of the leadership team. So the leadership team is about teaching, it's all about teaching the adults, teaching the students.
And the parents.
And the parents, thank you. And our two coordinators, Abby and Anna, help to coordinate all of this. And we've definitely had those conversations. So what is the work of making sure that we are onboarding people all of the time? We know that we need to do that with everything, regardless of whether it's this or, you know, our math program. And so that is part of the work that the teams, I would say, are still figuring out, right? Like, we're still figuring out the roles of all of these people. We have a coach that works with us. She came and spent a day with us a couple weeks ago.
I mean, we still do
Caroline's culture lady, but I'm actually on the leadership team, and we've had some really in-depth conversations recently about how we are going to, you know, our support staff aren't here as many hours as us. They're not a part of as many professional development hours as we are. We have new staff that join us each year and mid-year, so we've made, you know, some slideshows. We've talked about like monthly, weekly on Kelly's newsletters. How can we add information that people can read each week to gain more knowledge? So that's definitely been on our radar as to how we can continue the education of the adults, because we were a part of the almost week-long training that we got as adults, but there are staff members here who weren't hired last year that were hired this year, and they're getting the training now. But I do think the program is laid out so well that the classroom teachers and any other, I have a Cold Hollow student who works in my room, and she's always here, the 2 days she's here, she's always here for Leader in Me, and she's even using the language and talking about, you know, what her big rocks were or how she sharpened her saw. And so you quickly absorb the information, even if you weren't a part of the original trainings. It's easy information to share with others.
So they do a 15-minute lesson every day that is very intentional, and then the language is also just very intentionally embedded.
It's also fairly easy to pick up, right? Like, if I hear someone saying, oh, that's out of my, you know, if I was in Leslie's lesson like that Cold Hollow student is, it's very easy to say, oh, big rocks. Oh, what is most important to me? What are the major things that I need to get done? Okay, well, maybe I'm not here at this school all the time, but I know that there are major things in my life that I do have to get done. Whether I'm a student, whether I'm a staff member.
And all staff members have access to our Leader in Me website where we get the lessons, and it's each grade. So even though I feel like classroom teachers do have an advantage because we are the ones teaching it every day, even non-classroom teachers can go in, like for example, we had the PE teacher, Jeff, come up to 2nd and 3rd grade at the beginning of the year and said, like, I know I'm not teaching it, but what can I do? What language can I do? And we told him what lesson we're on, and he's been you know, sometimes we'll teach a lesson and go right to PE, and what he says matches what we just talked about. And it's not something that we connected on ahead of time, but it just matched up that way.
That's great. As somebody relatively new to this, I want to say that I found you three really inspiring in your discussion of it. It felt, this is the season for Hallmark holiday movies, and it just had that, it had that nice,
Right out of a Hallmark movie.
it had that nice,
Your outfit.
and to Kelly, I would say, you know, thinking about, you know, you looking at the system overall and how you've put together this real culture changer. I have a lot of respect for it, and I'm probably gonna have to pick your brain at some point. Even though high school is different, it's not that different.
You can come visit anytime. Yeah.
That's cool.
It's totally applicable, and there are high school leader in these.
There are high school
I was gonna
ones.
say, it's not really any different, it's a culture change, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
a
what I'm
culture
hearing.
change has to start with the adults that are in the building.
Can I say something as a mom?
Yes.
So my 1st grader, he really likes winning. Really? So he has started saying think win win and like out loud at dinner or playing games with his sisters when he's losing. He'll remind himself think win win, and he says stuff at the dinner table and I will say, what does that mean? And in his 1st grade nonsense, like he tries to explain it, but it's really powerful. At least for him, like he really likes winning. Losing
I
is
think the
not
thing that's going to
something.
be the neatest thing to see is going to be the kindergartners are getting it for the first time, and we're getting it for the first time, and 2nd grade's getting it for the first time, but next year it's not going to be the first time.
Yeah.
You know, the students that I'm going to be getting next year will have received an entire year's worth of Leader in Me training, and on and on and on, and eventually we're going to get to the point where every grade level has, that's all they know, which is going to be really neat to see, because it's changed so much in one trimester that it's going to be really neat to see, you know, in 6 years when our kindergartners are 5th graders, how much they have changed and how much the language is just built into our building.
I mean, we won't be presenting to the board, they will.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's totally
that's the
true.
goal. And
That's
you
what
might
those schools do.
you might notice like Kelly doesn't really have a piece, you know, it's really about, I mean, this year she does, but the idea is to have Kelly kind of step back and have us lead it, and then as staff members, we need to step back and let the children lead it, which is pretty special.
That's awesome. Thank you all for coming out. That was incredible.
I'll watch these for you for tomorrow.
It's pretty awesome.
That'll
be one of them.
Yes.
Nice job,
Okay,
Kelly.
moving on to Morgan, you ready?
I believe I am. So Courtney's going to pull up the slideshow, which you have seen before. We'll take it a little farther into it, so you can go to the next one. So we are at your 3rd board meeting. We have the yield proposal, which I sent out to everyone by email. We actually have the first cut of your pupil count as well, which wasn't due until the 15th, but that's going to be in the documents that I pass around and that I shared with you by email earlier. And then in terms of where your final tax rate will end up, the last big number that we will have is the CLA, which comes sometime between Christmas and New Year's. We can skip over that for now. Just a reminder that there are 3 seats up for election. I believe it's Sarah and Elijah and Rachel are the 3. If you need copies of petitions for that, just reach out to me by email. General board budget objectives, these are the 3 board goals. We can add to these if you think it's relevant for any sort of public meeting, but we'd like to just kind of bring you back to this as we talk about changes in the budget. Enrollment projections, you've seen these before, so we won't spend a lot of time on this. The only thing I would point out to you is that dip between year 1 and year 2 is that first COVID dip. And so in the next year or two going forward, we're gonna see that fall off, and that's not gonna be part of the calculation for enrollment projections. So hopefully the calculations behind that will be a little more normal. I think we've gone over this enough. I'll talk a little bit more about Act 127 later on. In terms of PCB remediations, just to remind you that we've got 3 schools that we don't have test results for yet. Cold Hollow has done an initial inventory. The 2 high schools have not had any attention at all. We talked about health insurance going up 16.5%. And then we are also anticipating more tuition revenue because NMV has a very large 8th grade class and they only have about 40 kids in their graduating senior class. So the assumption is that you'll pick up most of those kids at one of your 2 high schools. These staffing changes we went over at the last meeting, I have not made any adjustments to these since that time. So just to recap, in Enosburg Elementary, rounding up the art teacher to full-time. Here at Richford Elementary, bringing Lori McGraw to full-time in your budget. Part of her is currently paid out of ESSER. Increasing art to full-time. There's an additional para and a half, let's say, and then bringing the family engagement coordinator in from ESSER as well. And then you go to the high schools. An additional art teacher at the high school, reduction of a technology assistant, which was actually shared with Enosburg Elementary as well. Bringing their French teaching position up to full-time. Bringing their interventionist position to full-time, which is bringing about 1/3 of it in from CFP. And then bringing in 4 days a week of a FPA advisor, and that's somebody that's currently paid out of ESSER as part of the Flexible Pathways Academy. At Richford High School, bringing in family engagement coordinator from ESSER, and that's a position that's currently now shared. She teaches quarter-time health, so that would be fully in your budget. There are pieces and parts of teachers across several folks, which is basically a reduction of just over a half, and then adding a planning room teacher, second planning room teacher at the high school, or paraeducator at the high school. And then at Cold Hollow, it's moving half-time of a teacher out of the Perkins grant into the general fund. She's been paid out of Perkins for several years now, and that is not going to be allowed next year.
And that's pre-tech, correct?
Pre-tech, yes. Kind of walking you through the annual meeting warning, and so when we do this presentation with your voters, we will do that. You don't need to spend any time on this now. Go ahead. 2 pie charts, which again, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. With this one, this is showing what kind of things you buy, and so the only takeaway from this that I want to remind folks is that red, almost 3/4 is what you spend on your own staff. So that's really in your budgets where most of the cost is. That blue 1/4 services, so some of that is tuition you pay to other districts. Contracted services might be NCSS folks that you have in your building. And that bigger blue wedge is primarily the supervisor union assessment, and the 3 biggest pieces of that are special ed, food service, transportation. And then that little green wedge at the top is sort of the stuff that you buy. So in years past, people were very focused on what do you have in your pencil budget, or can't you trim your copier budget at all? When you're talking about those things, and it's not that they're not important, but they're not gonna move the needle on your budget. That's, 5%, and much of that is taken up in things like electricity and fuel oil, which we probably won't skimp on. Move the next one. And then similarly, this is what we do with the money, and so a little over half of your budget is really instruction, so student-facing activities. You see that central services piece up there at about between 9 and 10 o'clock is the SU assessment and pieces and parts included in that. Buildings and grounds takes up a big chunk of this blue section of the budget. And then the rest of that are the various administrations and student
How's that
support.
compared to last year?
It's pretty similar. For your district, I don't think it fluctuates as much as it does in NMV, where the tuition piece of the pie can swing. Okay. So Act 127, I feel like I've beat this down, but it is pretty important, so I do want to go over it again. This is the change to the weights that we've been talking about now for probably 3 years. And this budget is the first year that they're being implemented. And so in Vermont, the Constitution requires that there is equal access to funding for all kids. And the way that's done across a state that is still valuing individual budget votes in individual districts is that they're using pupil weights to do that. So if we know that these kids cost more to educate than these kids, the district that has more of these kids is going to get more of the ability to raise tax money to educate them. When this was first envisioned under Act 60, which was probably in 2000 or 2001, they knew that different kinds of kids cost more or less to educate, but they didn't really have any data, or they didn't look for any data on what those differences might be. So they were making an educated guess. What Act 127 really did was it tasked the University of Vermont to dig pretty deep in the data and say, okay, we think a kid who does not hear English at home probably costs more to educate, but we want you, University of Vermont, to figure out how much more. And so when they did that, they brought those results to the legislature. Act 127 was passed, and it really did skew the weights from district to district. So some districts were seeing a pretty significant advantage in that they could raise more money for the same tax rate, and some districts were seeing a disadvantage. And so for the number of kids they have, they would really have to raise their tax rate to keep raising that same amount of money. But overall, the concept is the same, and the way the tax rates are set are the same. You take the money you need, you divide it by your kids, you divide it by the yield, which is given to us by the state, and that gets you your tax rate. The intent was that advantage districts like Enosburg-Richford, like NMV, would use that additional capacity to put in place programs to support those students. That might be specific with your English language learners, or it might be general to the extent that we're getting a benefit because of our sparsity up here, or because of the poverty levels up here. And then disadvantaged districts, those that were seeing a decline in students, had a 5-year glide path to kind of right-size those budgets, or at least adjust to those higher tax rates. The one problem with that is that the mechanism or the lever that currently we have in place to pay for those districts to have a kind of a slow reentry into this reality means that it's raising taxes across the state. And so, you and NMV are helping to pay for the districts as they kind of slowly move to that.
In a really complicated fashion, because as they slow roll into that, it has an impact on the dollar yield, which is one of those factors that Morgan talks to you about. So as that overall spending increases in the state, the yield goes down, and as the yield declines, it's going to impact you in terms of your tax rate.
Yep. So any questions on that? And we'll kind of go over it again in a couple of points, but
none of this is super new. We've been talking about this for a couple of years in terms of the intention behind this is more equitable opportunities for all students in Vermont, so it matters less about where you're geographically located, and it's more about more equitable outcomes, more equitable opportunities.
Go to the next one. So this slide walks you through the setting of the tax rate, and it's based on the budget that I'm about to pass around and that I shared with you earlier today. Obviously, that's not going to be where we end up at the end, and I will point to you areas where I still see some potential big movement over the next 4 weeks in terms of expenses. But if you look at that FY25 column in the middle, we start with the budgeted expenses, which is the amount of the spending plan that you're giving your principals and you're giving Lynn for the following year. Out of that, we're subtracting the local revenue that we know we're getting. The big increase here is primarily those tuition payments from NMV coming in. And that gives an ed spending amount. And the ed spending is the amount of money that you need to get from the state in order to support that budget. So again, we have local tax bills, but we have a statewide funding system for education. And so this is how we sort of get to the point where I say in March or April to my folks at the state, you're going to need to send Enosburg $18 million starting in July, and they set tax rates that way. You'll see the next line is what we're now calling the long-term weighted ADM, which is the fancy version of the number of kids that we get to count in your district. And so you see that number has gone up pretty dramatically since FY20. You now have about almost 1,700 kids that we're counting when we're looking at the tax rate. And that's really a result of those additional weights that we're getting for where we live and the population that we serve. Divide the pupils into the spending, and you get that ed spending per pupil figure of just under 11,000 right now. When I show you the chart later of where spending is relative to the rest of the state, this is really the number that we use in order to accurately compare how different districts are funding their schools. That dollar yield is the number that came out in the December 1 letter, and it will be final in May or June. That's ultimately set by the legislature. And then that will get you to your residential school tax rate, which is the rate that's applied before your CLA. And so a little bit of a drop in the current version that you've got in front of you.
How confident are we on the revenue, grant revenue?
We will be confident when you finalize a budget because it will tell me what we get to charge for tuition, and then it'll depend on how many kids come. So we budget. I think that you're going to get about 60% of the NMV 8th graders coming in, and then what I'll do is I'll take your 9th graders currently and say, okay, I think all of the 9th graders are coming back. Look at your 10th graders and say, well, I think they're all coming back, but you're going to lose 10% or 20% to the tech center. 11th to 12th graders, I figure those are all going to stay the same. If they're already in the tech center, they're going to stay there. You may lose a few to early college. But I think historically that's been pretty accurate. Part of the challenge is around students coming from NMV. If they have a custodial parent in Enosburg, they might have gone to school their entire life in Berkshire, but once they move to Enosburg High School, they become an Enosburg resident and you don't get to send a tuition bill for them. But that 60% figure that I use as a guesstimate kind of covers that as well. So this is the tax rate before CLA. It's starting with FY20, which was the first year of unification, and it just kind of shows the trend. 22 to 24, I think, was largely driven by coming out of COVID, and the ed fund was relatively strong, and so that was helping to drive down that tax rate. The FY25 dot will move as we continue to move this budget, but that's where it is as of today. Ooh, two more, go to the next one. And then this is the equalized rates. So you'll see the red line is Richford, the green line is Enosburg, and this is after the CLA has been applied. So if you look at the line in Enosburg, you can see even though the ERU rate has been going down since FY22, the Enosburg rate has stayed relatively flat, and that's because of the CLA and property values increasing there. In Richford, there's a significant drop from 23 to 24. That was because of the reappraisal that you folks just had. And so what the reappraisal does is it takes, a house that was at $100,000. The state has, using the CLA, had always thought it was maybe $160,000 of value. Reappraisal came in and pushed it up to $180,000. And so on an $180,000 house, we can drive the tax rate down and still raise the same amount of money. And so you will not see that drop again. My guess is that Enosburg is going to see one of those drops once they do the reappraisal. And most of our towns are going through a reappraisal at some point in the next couple of years. So this is looking at this current year spending divided by these new weighted students. So this is your per pupil spending, that $10,000 or $11,000 that we're talking about for next year. This is pretty hard to see. If you start at the bottom, right at the bottom, the least spending town is at $8,000, and it goes up to about, I think, $14,000 at the top. Starting from the bottom, the first darker line is NMV. The darker line above that is Enosburg-Richford. So you're at kind of the bottom 20% of the state in terms of your per pupil spending. The red lines scattered throughout that chart are the other districts in Franklin County, so you can kind of see who your close by peers are. And then the two black lines in the middle, the lower of the two is the Franklin County average, and then the one just about dead center is the statewide average. So you can see, not surprisingly, since we've always been towards the bottom of spending, now that we are able to count more kids, we're still down there.
So this is with the new spending plan,
This is this year's spending plan, but the new student count.
the new calculation, okay, so it doesn't really move us as well.
Right, I mean, if anything, it probably pushes us relatively down. I think you'll see, if you looked at where some of the other Franklin County towns were last year, we tended all to be below the statewide average, and now that those counts have changed for Franklin County towns who did not benefit from Act 127, you're seeing that their per pupil costs are going up.
So this question is maybe a bit tangential, but how do you think that that's going to be viewed at the state level? Like, did this accomplish their goal in terms of this new way of looking at things?
I think it increases the equity in the formula. I think we're not quite there because of that soft landing that everyone's paying for. So I think that, I think it's definitely an improvement. I think once we get through the first couple of years and all the towns are kind of drifting to the tax rate that they actually should be at, we will be in a much better place in terms of the Averils and the towns in the Northeast Kingdom sort of being able to support their students in the same way that a Stowe or a South Burlington would. No system is perfect. I think Act 60 was probably one of the most equitable in the country for a long time, and they're just realizing that some of the assumptions that were underlying it weren't supported by data, and so I think this is a solid improvement. But it'll still be a couple of years before it's fully implemented, assuming nothing changes, which it often does.
That's for me.
That's for them. You can take one if there's enough for them. I did send that. This is what I sent out by email as well. And go to the PDF. So, yes. And so we're going to start on the colorful sheet, which Courtney's also put up on the screen. Bless you.
Bless you.
And you also probably have this by email now, Kelly, as well. This is the high-level look at the budget. So this is what will be in your town book, the district-wide book, and we use it in probably further stripped-down version in the mailer that we send out to folks. And we will walk through this, and then we can go through the detail. I'll tell you again, once we commit to the staffing plan, most of this is pretty well set. I would be happy to have folks at their leisure go through this because you can probably all find things that look a little off or we're calculating something wrong, and I'd rather find that now as opposed to March 8th when we're living with the budget. But if you start with the one-pager, the first section is that instruction section that we saw on the pie chart. Direct instruction is first. So this is kind of what we normally think of as teachers in front of students in a classroom. You'll see that currently under special education, we've got a 0 there. That's because for right now, I've got all the paras coded as direct instruction. And as we go through the process in our office to track who's spending time on special ed versus regular ed, at some point I will take a chunk of money and I'll pull it out of direct and put it into special ed. Vocational instruction are Nate's teachers at Cold Hollow. Athletics, co-curricular, adult ed are all relatively self-explanatory. Under support services, these are things that indirectly benefit students. So student support would be things like your guidance office and your nurses. Instructional support would be things like your librarians, technology, professional development for teachers. General administration is the school board and a lot of the district level insurances. So what we spend for your liability and the insurance, building insurance, vehicle insurance, things like that. School administration are your principals and the section of the budget that they control, so their offices, their assistants. Central services is the SU budget, again, primarily special ed, food service, transportation, buildings and grounds, self-explanatory. And then transportation is really the transportation for things like sports trips, field trips, the cost of bringing kids to and from home to school is up in that central services line. And then acquisition construction, we had put $400,000 in the budget for the Sugar House for the budget year that we are currently going through. I don't have anything in that line currently. We could certainly add back to that, and Nate will be talking about the Sugar House a little bit later on tonight. Debt service historically was your long-term bonds for the two high schools. Those have been retired, and so we carry a little bit of money for the loans that we keep on the books if we need to borrow money to cover costs in primarily July, August, September before the state starts sending us the tax revenue. Are there any general questions on how that's laid out? So I think the big changes, obviously, if you look at the direct instruction up 2.6 million, special ed down 1.2 million, those two are offsetting each other. But the increases that are still there are primarily the staffing that we discussed, as well as 16% of increase in health insurance. We do, obviously, we carry stuff for things like textbooks and supplies, and those go up each year, but in terms of comparing that to the cost of your people, it's pretty minuscule. Student support is up. I believe that's close, that a lot of that is really going to be just generally where salaries are ending up. We've got a couple of open positions in Enosburg High School still. We budgeted for them, but we don't know what cost of people we'll eventually fill those with. Your central office assessment is up. The SU budget is up primarily because of pulling in some of those positions from ESSER. Since this number has been put in here, we've gotten a little bit clearer picture at the SU level of revenue coming in, and we've started to make some decisions about people that we can leave in the ESSER grant for a couple of extra months before we need to pull them into the SU budget. So I'm fairly confident that that number could drift down unless the SU board goes in a different direction than I would anticipate.
What, have you figured out if you took out the ESSER money, if you could take out the ESSER money, what that would look like, you know what I'm saying? I know a lot of these increases are ESSER.
Yeah, I haven't said ESSER is,
Right.
worth $500,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't think that number would look so bad, the $2 million, if you took that money out of there.
Right.
Along with the increase in health.
Yeah, and I would say from what we're seeing in terms of building the SU budget, food cost is up significantly. That's something that shot up dramatically over the last 2 years. This is the first year that we have been budgeting for transportation with a contract in hand. So when we budgeted last year, we had the bid packet out, and that came in higher than we had expected. And at that point, we'd already had that lower number in the budget. Special ed is actually, I think, going to be down a little bit, if not primarily because of that alternative program that Michelle has had such success with. We're really able to not budget for as many of those out of district placements, which can be 100 to 150 a kid. So again, looking at the revenue, the big story is the increase in your high school tuition. I will refine that as we get closer to warning this, and we have a better idea of where both your tuition rate is going to end up, and then where Nate's tuition rate is going to end up. For the vocational center, we will actually get a number from the state that says this is how many students you get to bill, just because they run those two systems completely differently. So we will at least know how many high school tuition kids we're going to get money for if they're at the Voc Center. At Richford High and Enosburg High, it's kind of a guess. We have under other revenue, the last line in that green section, this is where we put the use of the fund balance. So this will be new to Elijah, but what we do is we look at FY23 and we brought in X number of dollars and we spent Y number of dollars, and we end that year either with a surplus or a deficit. We don't have the final audited numbers yet, but we think it's around $414,000 sort of in the bank left over on June 30th. That, if nothing else is done, that goes back to the voters in terms of sort of buying down that tax rate. In the past 3, 4, 5 years, you have asked permission from the voters, and they've given you permission to put a certain amount of that into a capital reserve fund. So that's a fund that kind of sits off to the side, and then we can use that for building projects like we've had at Cold Hollow. You could use it for PCB remediation, should that come up, or paving projects, some of those kind of big ticket items that we don't tend to budget for in our regular budget. This year, because you are in such good shape with that increase in tuition revenue, as well as those higher pupil counts, I think you could take that entire 414 and ask for all of it to go to the capital reserve fund, and it would not, you would still be bringing forward a flat tax rate.
I think it's important for you to build that capital reserve. Right now, there's money for PCB remediation. You still have 3 buildings that we don't know about, and we've definitely, we're in a process on the other side, and there's money that's promised at the state level, but there's not enough money promised at the state level to cover the remediation costs. And we're seeing this play out in a variety of schools across the state. So there's going to be an ask for more money in PCB mitigation, but we don't know what the legislature's going to do with it. So if we get a positive test in any of the schools and that money isn't adequately funded, we're still going to have to mitigate. So it would be helpful if we had a deeper pocket to start with, in case, savings account of sorts.
Yeah, and I don't know that the legislature is gonna have enough information to even have a clue as to how much this remediation is gonna cost.
Or do we even have a time frame for the PCB remediation at all?
For your testing?
Yeah,
No.
well, not for the testing, for the testing that came back positive.
So you have to start within a year, depending on, there's 2 options, and you've got to start within a year, but that's just like getting you in the process. And what we're seeing is it's pretty backlogged with the limited number of people who do this work in the state and the number of positive tests that the state are getting back.
And so the first school to be identified in our SU was Berkshire. And we're waiting for results on a second round of testing there before we even know what things we might need to remediate. And if those results are not conclusive, it means that we have to go back and, look somewhere else for where the problem is. So I feel like we're pretty far out from any actionable remediation unless something comes back really clear pretty soon. And we know from a call that we were on earlier this week, yesterday, that we think there's about $14 million in this PCB fund, and we've heard of one project that's taking 4 of it. So it's, I think if you're not in the queue now, you may be out of luck on this round.
And when schools have positives, sometimes it closes down parts of your building. So I've seen colleagues from other parts of the state where they've had to figure out how to stand up a space for their kids in the meantime. So not that $400,000 is going to be the end all be all, but at least you have something there just as a contingency, I think is smart.
Is there anything currently in the capital reserve fund?
Yes, you have obligated some projects or allowed some projects to tap into that. I think we drew some of it down last year. What we try to do is run as much in your general fund, assuming we have it, and not touch those funds. So I think last year we came with the Enosburg parking lot and said we'd like to be able to use the capital reserve fund if we need to, but if we don't need to, we leave it there. So I can get that figure for you where we ended up at the end of the year. We have not touched anything yet this year.
And in terms of utilizing it once it's there, is that a board decision, or do we have to take it to another vote?
It's a board decision. It has to be used for one of your buildings, specific to capital. But that's, that becomes in your purview. And to the extent that you kind of dig into the 30 pages of detail, I did also this year on both sides start putting some more intentional money behind kind of those mid-level projects. I've been back and forth with Matt over the last few months on some air handlers that need to be replaced there. And it's not gonna be a parking lot or a new tech center, but it's gonna be $40,000-$50,000. And so that's something that, maybe you get lucky and you had more tuition kids come in that year, but really we should be planning on that kind of mid-level project kind of coming up in every school every year.
Wasn't there a boiler at one point that was in question? In Richmond, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the wood chip boiler, and we're hopeful that most of that will be out of a grant.
Okay.
There may be some share, but that's been a lot of Vern's life over the last month or so.
He's pretty masterful at finding grant money to pay for those projects. So what he's been able to accomplish with lighting and heating projects and such.
And the LED light, we're all set with that, right? LED
Yep.
light.
We haven't installed them all at Enosburg High School, but we are squeaking in under the wire the December 31st to at least get the rebates on the materials.
Yeah.
They're counting them quickly, counting bulbs.
Yep. So, yeah, there's obviously a big project on the horizon at the tech center. We know there's asbestos remediation that we'd like to get to at really both elementary schools. Richford High School is in relatively good shape. We've got the boiler there. Enosburg High School in relatively good shape, but obviously we're waiting on the PCBs. And so in terms of what will still move in this budget from this month to next, vocational tuition, high school tuition, there could be some movement on the SU assessment, but that's really those are the big areas that I see. I'm also making some assumptions on vocational revenue. So a big chunk of that state revenue in the middle of the green section is in one way or another tied to the tech center. We haven't actually gotten those numbers yet in terms of what we're gonna get from the state, but normally we have a pretty solid estimate from them by the end of December. If and when you go through the budget detail, which you have, and Elijah, you've got it in your email, if you haven't seen it yet, this will follow the same flow as that one pager, except it's split out by school. You'll first see it, Enosburg Elementary School, and you can kind of see them separately, because that is how we build a budget.
Any questions on that?
So, just if there's a big course correction, I certainly don't see anything scary with this, how we're looking. You could add, you could add money to it and we would still be going with a relatively flat tax rate. We will not have a new yield number before you warn the budget. We might get an updated equalized pupils number, but I doubt it would change much. And so at this point, this is where we want to know if there's any big course corrections, like we don't want to have a principal at Enosburg High School anymore, or we want to add...
He's snoozing.
We want to add 17 counselors, so each building has 5. That's kind of what we need now before we can...
Principals come with anything yet?
If this is inclusive of what the principals have come with.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. I know there's an opportunity, right, for some programs and to improve some things, so that's already included in what we're looking at?
So yeah, all that staffing list that you saw, so we've got increases in French and art, those are all incorporated in here.
There's also some increases in terms of opportunities for kids and substantially more out of school opportunities, field trips and experiences, and bringing experiences in, programs in. There's also some money that we've set aside for more engaging materials that we can use with educators for students.
Which is like the intent of, yeah. the
Right.
program.
Exactly.
We've never been able to, like, and Morgan and I were talking about this part of the budget, because this is usually factored, it's not really budgeted at the school level, it's usually factored and then applied per pupil across all the schools. So we were talking about, way back when I was a teacher, it was pretty much one field trip a year, and you could afford it if you charged admission to your chaperones and to your kids, and your budget would pretty much pay for your bus. And that was all you had for the year. It was rare to have anything more than that, and I can't say that we've really funded much more than that in the last 29 years that I've been here. So this has the potential to change that significantly for kids.
And then I'm trying to set up meetings with all the principals over the next few weeks, just to do that line by line dive, mostly to reassure myself that I haven't forgotten any people, because that's the big fear. But we may tweak some of these lines before you see it in January. And then the SU board meets next week, and they may choose to finalize their budget then, depending on how those 6 are feeling at the time.
Either way, they will have finalized it before you meet for your next January meeting.
Anything else?
I think I had one other. Motion for that. Oh, I wanted to talk about the 2024 annual meeting. And we had this conversation with NMV last week as well. So at your last official meeting where you have to vote on your moderator and your clerk, you only had 2 residents show up.
That weren't employees of the district.
That weren't employees. NMV has decided to explore kind of doing away with the from the floor voting. You're still obligated to have an informational meeting, but basically if the voters approve it, they would move those 2 votes to town meeting day with a ballot, and then you're not kind of obligated to this 3rd Thursday in March or February or whatever it is.
I think they're still time bound with how many days before the vote they would have to have an informational session, right?
But you could also have multiple meetings as well if you wanted. And so I think I brought this up, or we started discussing this last April after the March meeting, trying to get a sense if that's a direction you want to go. If it is, I'll have the lawyer look at your warning as well. They have to kind of go back to the first meeting minutes and the organizational document to make sure we do it right, but we could do that. And if you want to leave it the same, we can leave it the same as well, and we'll either way, we'll be meeting at Richford High School this year, and maybe we'll double our attendance.
Any thoughts on that? I'd just move it, maybe move it into the vote.
Okay, and I'll have that,
Yeah, I agree. It seems to make a lot of sense. I think maybe I talked to one of you guys about that last year when we did it. I think it makes a lot more sense to just, vote on that alongside anything else we're voting on.
Yeah.
All they can do is say no.
You need a motion for that, or?
Nope. It'll be when you warn the, when you sign the warning. Yeah, I'm trying to find my thing.
Budget for this year.
Do you have any concerns about risk of doing it?
No, I think it makes perfect sense.
Potential risk, I was asking.
You know
Do you
what?
have any concerns?
I think people expressed when we were merging that they would lose that opportunity to come in and have rich discussions about the budget that they used to have when they voted. I think at least one of the communities lost voting from the floor on the school budget. I don't think Richford did, but Enosburg did. So they were worried about that, when in reality, the same year that we merged, COVID happened. And so their participation looked really different. It was virtual. That was, in the beginning when people were trying to figure out what this new merge system really was, I think some of their fears went away after a little while. They could see that the bad things that people predicted that were going to happen weren't, and you could see from the tax graph that we really were coming in pre-CLA at a better tax rate for our communities. So I think that's a piece of it, but just the public engagement itself has changed over time. So the only risk I could see is that people are worried about losing that opportunity, but those people also have not been accessing that opportunity. So they could still come out and ask the hard questions. They just wouldn't be voting on
The moderator.
just the
and
moderator,
clerk.
right? Moderator and clerk.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's very small, Kua.
So this means that there would not be that annual in-person meeting, or we would this year, but they vote for the
Either way,
future?
we would this year, and if they supported that change, we would still have an informational meeting, at least one, but we wouldn't need to pay for the town clerk to be there and pay for the moderator to be there to run it. It's something that we, the board chair could welcome everyone and field the questions rather than doing it kind of like a formal meeting.
Could it be virtual?
It could.
I wouldn't recommend that we do that. I mean, I think we could have a hybrid option.
Or just broadcast it.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for welcoming people in to our spaces for the opportunity.
And it's hard to know how much COVID reset things. So it's not that people are out of COVID yet, but they went through COVID and they've decided they really don't need to do as many in-person things. It's just not important. I don't know. Okay, so I will set up your warning to include that, and we can continue the discussion next month. And then the last thing on my agenda was just informational. And we still don't have the final number, although I expect it'll come in this week. I don't expect it'll come in. I was told it would come in this week. We'll see.
Okay. Lynn?
Okay, Courtney's gonna put a slideshow up here.
Will you be able to add my resignation? Not my member's resignation.
Are you trying to give me a heart attack on camera?
I phrased that wrong.
I will.
Morgan or?
Yes.
Whatever, I just want to,
Yeah, that's okay.
No, when was this put?
So we'll jump into personnel. So we have some hiring that we've done. None of these require you to take action. This is all informational. I think it is all coaches. It's interesting for me to see so many former students coming back to serve their communities in coaching roles. So that's exciting to see. So we do have one teacher who is not going to be returning after the end of first semester. Jonah Frankie from Frankie from Enosburg High School. He's a science teacher. Will not be returning. So I'm not going to ask you to take action on that because it's actually a breach of contract. So I won't ask you to do anything with that. It's just informational. You have one paraeducator at Enosburg Elementary School that did meet the December 1st notification, Cheryl Lena. You have several open positions. Those are, I don't think any of those are new. You've seen those before. They're just positions we've been unable to fill so far this year. In your master agreement, we have a December 1st notification deadline for people who are intending to make column movement. So if we're moving from bachelor's to bachelor's 15 to bachelor's 30 and so on, they have to tell us of their intention. So we have quite a number of teachers who have done what they need to do to make those jumps. And there are a couple that are notifying us that they intend to probably make 2 jumps. So our teachers are engaging in quite a lot of professional learning. So that's always a benefit to our students. I thought you had an unpaid leave request, but you do not, because I forgot that Janessa Higgs is an SU employee, even though she works at Enosburg Elementary School, so I will be bringing that to the FNESU board next week. I had under other, on the next slide, I think I put it in there, Courtney. Of course, we have the lovely student pictures. I don't have anything under student except the pictures. And the only other I had, I think that we brainstormed prior to the meeting. We could not find documentation about who the representatives were for the support staff negotiation. I think we figured it out. Morgan did find it right before the meeting started, so I think it's Sarah and Akua who will be doing the support staff negotiations, along with Mary and Aaron from the NMV side. So we'll be shifting into that. We have 2 tentative dates for January and 1 for March. There was not a common day that we could make work in February. It is just a really packed month. So you'll get an email from me tonight that has those dates to just check your calendar against. That's all I have for you tonight.
Just one quick thing, the board retreat, we're still.
Oh, yes. So we're still, we have the board retreat next week, I think. Let me just get to my calendar. The 18th. Yeah, so we'll be doing that at the central office, and that'll be from 5 until 8. So we would love to see you there.
Great. Kelly?
I have everything in my board report is informational. I would just like to add that the RISE program, which has been housed here, began here, housed here for the last 5 years, is moving to Enosburg Elementary School after the holiday break. The decision happened rather quickly, but not after a lot of conversation around the program actually having growing pains. Like, it has reached a point where there's lots more work that can be happening, and we're trying to share staff between the other programs that are in Enosburg and here, so, really like the BCBAs, and just really needing to move to that next level of work that we can do with this program. So it will be moving in next Friday. They'll be starting at Enosburg Elementary School. Enosburg has graciously moved some things around, some classrooms around. We had a little celebration with the staff this afternoon. It certainly has been, it was a hard decision, for me to be part of in some ways, just because it has been very, very near and dear to me. But these are students that belong to all of us. We have multiple schools that are part of this program and staff, and it's an incredible staff that is attached to it right now. And this is really the next best thing. So I just wanted to share that.
I just want to take a moment to commend Kelly, because this was a program that, under her leadership and Michelle Taberge's leadership, we were able to get off the ground here at Richford Elementary School. So I thank you so much for being a part of that foundational team to bring that here, because I think our students are being really well served right here in FNESU in their own community. And this will allow us to have that partnership with the TAPS program, so the staff will be able to work between TAPS and RISE, between the two schools, and do more of the community work. And again, the shared staffing piece with our BCBAs are important. But I just want to thank you, Kelly, because this has been incredible, and you being able to articulate, like, these students belong to all of us is so powerful. Like, that's something that we remind one another of all the time, and this will create an opportunity for students on the other end of our system to make it a little more accessible for kids in some of those far ends. So thank you.
Our staff has, like, our school-wide staff has, it definitely pains them too, because it's a very special group of kids. Vivian Marlowe, this is her classroom, was just in the process of coming out of her leadership roles through working with some of the students in that particular program in that room. And it's a special population, it's a special group of people that are working with them. And we started my first year here And COVID was my first year here, and the program was like in fits and starts, but it was like, you know, a giant step forward, a few steps backward, but we're constantly making progress. So it's in a good place, and it's gonna be in a better spot in Enosburg with its partner programs. So, yeah.
I know Beth isn't here, but I do want to hit on the 100% of 8th graders in the LA. That was pretty impressive. I don't know if anybody saw that. Did you want to add anything to the best?
What's that?
Did you want to add anything to best?
So I think I was just looking up so the ELA, to be specific, was the writing proficiency, writing stamina benchmark. I think that there's a lot packed in here in Beth's report. I think that some of the trips that Richford High School gets to attend because they're part of the Gear Up program are pretty incredible, and I think that you probably saw on social media Beth highlighting that Vermont Air National Guard trip in the middle of November. That was pretty powerful. And some of the grant opportunities that she shared, I thought were powerful.
Okay, Jen's not here.
Both, I just want to say, Beth and Jen don't miss meetings. Like they're both quite sick. There's a lot going around right now.
Do you want to add anything to Jen's?
I think that Jen does a really good job of being explicit in terms of she's constantly at Enosburg Elementary School looking at the data and analyzing the data and thinking about instruction and learning, and so she's got some of that information in there, and she just gave an example. That visual there is really interesting by way of example of looking at the progress that students made from a beginning of the year benchmark until now. So that pre-test and post-test and how they're using that data to determine that growth, I think is a really good example of some of the shifts that are happening within EES.
Matt?
Yeah, so just a little bit to piggyback on what Kelly said, having TAPS move to EFMHS this year is really wonderful, and I can understand why Beth was reluctant to see them leave and why it's hard for you, because those programs do some pretty magical things, and I've loved having them under our roof. I say we have 3 linked but distinct communities in EFMHS, which is middle, high, and TAPS, which is pretty cool. One thing that I would highlight, did I mention last time the technology grant that we got? I wrote it in, I can never remember if I just wrote it in the report. So our tech integrationist applied for a, I'm gonna get the word right, Vermont Agency of Education STEAM Challenge Grant. And the idea is to take our multimedia lab and bring it up into the current decade more. So acquiring some new technology equipment. One piece is pretty significant. It's called a laser cutting printer. So he gave I didn't know what this was, but he gave the example like you could take your cell phone, and if you're like me and don't put a case on it, which is a bad idea, but you could put it under it and it could engrave right onto this or onto something else. So it would allow students to do different kinds of design things, so STEAM having the art component and the technology. So that is something, so the grant was for $10,500, and that was something maybe under the new budget we could have put in there, but under kind of existing funds is something we probably wouldn't have ever been able to make a top priority. And then also another MakerBot, which is the regular 3D printer, but a more updated one. In addition, we have one in there right now, plus the materials. So gradually we're trying to make that, much as like this year I've tried to make the library more of a go-to community hub. I also think we'll be able to make the multimedia lab, maybe we can rename it something like the, what's the word? Makerspace, more of a makerspace for the school, and it's on that big hallway with windows so people can look in and see that there's cool stuff going on. And that was Robert's initiative, which was wonderful. Yeah.
Nate?
Hi, the only updates are our building project in Sugar House, so I will start with the Sugar House. I've been working with Vern. We're moving the Sugar House to the woodlot, and after some redesign, we're looking at a builder design project. Vern's very confident that he's gonna come in, we're gonna come in way under the first proposal we saw with our redesign, so those bid packets should be able to go out within, I think, probably by Friday, and then we'll start having some numbers we can look at. The goal is still to have bids in and have it built this spring and summer, so we can stay within, what we had budgeted to start with, so that's, hopefully if that timeline works, then we can get it done right when we need to get it done. The other piece of that was we sent out letters to all our local suppliers, our vendors. CDL and Lapierre both sent quotes back, and we decided to go with Lapierre, and they really want to work with us and give us an amazing discount if they can have their equipment in the Sugar House, so they can bring customers and other sugar makers from around the area, even Canada, into our place, to have our place be a showcase for the most up-to-date technology. So that's very exciting. Before I move to the next one, does anybody have any questions about the Sugar House?
No.
Okay. And then Courtney sent out we're not quite at a first draft, but you can definitely, if you look at the Cold Hollow Career Center building itself, I think Courtney sent that email out today.
I can share it if you need me to.
Yeah, if you want to, like I said, I just really want to go over at this point, it's really just been conceptual of what we are looking to achieve. And so if you were to, what we're trying to achieve is obviously more space for construction. Our construction program wants to be able to do things like HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. So that would be, if you're looking at the building now, that'd be the green building over the left, kind of in that general area. We don't know for sure because there's a lot of still what ifs of the Monteith's house and such. But in general, if that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve, is get more space for construction, and at the same time get more space for auto. Baxter's got an amazing program there, and he's got electrical cars now, hybrid cars, and then regular cars, and some diesel engines, so that needed some space. So those are the two programs that probably needed the most space upgrades, and then the other conceptual designs are each lab, forestry, medical careers, auto and construction would all have a classroom adjacent to the lab space. So it wouldn't be like if you go to the auto classroom right now, Paxton might have kids, sitting underneath the car under a lift doing, a lesson on ohms or whatnot. So that was a big piece that we were asking for. And then if you look at, if you want to go to the inside, space-wise, we're not adding any space. Again, we're just kind of restructuring, putting a main office complex. So if you're looking at the gray area in the middle, all the guidance, myself, co-op, academic support special academic support coordinator would all be in that one spot. And then adjacent to that in the gray, we're looking to create our conference room, kind of a multi-use. It could be a community classroom for adult ed. It could be where we hold our meetings. It could be where we hold our program advisory board meetings. So just a space where we can have a classroom that can be used for a lot of things, including a little kitchenette in there and whatnot. And then upstairs, if you look at the purple, everything else upstairs pretty much stays the same. Medical careers gets their classroom, and then the space that's blue. Human services, teacher prep is kind of a lighter blue. They get a classroom space, and then a classroom lab where they can bring in elementary school kids and watch watch students teach lessons. But the purple is really the other thing. We have that space, and you can see it's a large room, but we want to have the ability to break into two. One of the things that I can foresee happening at Cold Hollow is that we start engaging in more academic integration, not just with our program teachers, but potentially having shared staff or new staff that is teaching ELA standards and proficiencies or math standards proficiencies, and they will eventually need a space, and that would be, those classrooms would ultimately be those spaces. So there's still quite a few things that are not accurate on this. Like I said, we're trying to get just a first draft done. They haven't provided any numbers yet. And there's still some, the mechanical and electrical people have to look at the design. So I think at some point they want to come and really give you the real rundown. But I just wanted to share with you the kind of the concepts and the conceptual designs that we're thinking about. Morgan, anything that from our meetings with Black River that you want to add?
I would just add that when we talked about the other properties that come up in the area last meeting, you mentioned you wanted to see what a child care center as part of this project would look like. Right now, I believe Melissa Wood is sort of refreshing the survey to try to get an idea of how many kids we would actually be talking about. I did tip Black River to that as an idea that space that you saw where the Monteith House currently is could house something up there, but we need to get an idea from Melissa on how many little humans we're talking about before we can put a square footage to it. But you will see that on a future site.
Yeah, and then the other thing we talked about is any of the properties on School Street being part of the project, and I think some of the concerns there were just drainage and wetlands, but we haven't really looking into that option either yet.
What's your next step with that, Nate?
I've given some, with the properties, I don't know exactly. I think that's something that I need to speak with Vern about, but as far as the design and whatnot, we've given some feedback, and they've got to redesign some of the suggestions that we sent back to them. Again, we're waiting on, whether that construction building's gonna go there, it's gonna move down to where storage is located because of potential childcare at that spot. And then I'm not exactly sure what we wanna do about property purchases to adjacent properties, so that can be a discussion here or in a small group or whatnot, I'm not sure.
Is someone gonna do the work to figure out like how wet we're talking? Is that something that John spent any time looking into, or had you?
I had that conversation with Vern, and I think he was gonna talk with the town, because I think even you mentioned there was at one point they were gonna put in drainage back there. So because that's where anything that we build up at our site goes directly to the backyards of the people on School Street. So that's something that we have to be cognizant of. But I think Vern's gonna talk with the town and the village people to see what, because there was something planned there at one point, but it never took place. Now with all the, with the amount of houses for sale there, it might be a time where they take advantage of putting some drainage back there and put some tile down, but I'm not sure. So that's something that Vern and I have to figure out what the next steps are.
Okay, thank you.
When was the property we were talking about maybe putting a driveway or something into?
Yeah, we were talking about it being more accessible for buses to come in, and or the other piece that Nate and I had talked about is right now kids have to leave the high school and they have to kind of head down, and I'm not going to remember is it Missisquoi Street, Nate?
Right, yeah, they walk over towards Champlain Chevy and then down Missisquoi Street into the current entrance.
Whereas if we did this, they would just come out of the school, go up School Street a little bit, and then they would be on the path to Cold Hollow. So it would be a little bit more of a direct route for the walkers, even in between the classes.
Right. And then the only other thing that just to update is We got a grant from the governor for $23,000, and I think I told you about this before, but you get a trailer that's damaged in the floods. And so my construction teacher's been traveling to Johnson and other parts of the state looking for a super trailer, and it does look like we found one. And so pretty soon, no one's moving into Cold Hollow, but there will be a trailer there for a while until we fix it. So our students will be engaged in fixing rehabbing a trailer. And we'll be working with community partners to both help fund and supply their expertise in teaching our kids while fixing up a trailer for a family. So no one's moving in. It'll be there for hopefully not too long, but for a little while.
Anything else, Nate?
Nope, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next board meeting is January 9th. Got any other future agenda?
You still have one order of business from earlier in the meeting?
We do, yes. Back to the Littlewood Field Dairy Center. Any discussion on that? For the money that they wanted for the Littlewood Field? I propose that we do the same as we do for Richmond.
Same, my other thought was because of that being, we have enough fields, I'm assuming we have enough spring fields.
Yeah.
So that we wouldn't have, like, say, Richford needed it.
Right.
No dairy center, that type of thing. That would be an option too, but I guess probably not, you have to keep that part separate.
So I think Shauna's still on, so I think your question is a valid one, Sarah. So if there was not enough fields
Yeah.
in Richford,
Right.
Especially when they flood,
Right.
if there's any flooding.
Shauna, is that something that you could answer?
I was half listening, can you say that again?
Yeah.
My question is because we're pretty much set up here in Richford at the playground, but for some reason, if we're not, would Richford teams have access to those fields if needed? Or it would be mostly at
I mean, I think the fields just need to be coordinated, with Little League. Obviously, they have kind of, that's where they play their major and minor games, but their games don't start till 6 o'clock. So I think there'd have to be some way to coordinate the use of the fields, which I'm sure that can be figured out.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't say it's a no. I mean,
Right.
but I honestly couldn't tell you what the, how that would all shake out as far as timing in the day, and obviously, the Little League teams usually aren't using the fields till 5 o'clock or so.
Right.
So
I think that's a great
I guess
question.
it's hard to answer that question.
Because it would just be like for practices, there isn't gonna be any games played there.
Right, yeah,
So just
no,
practice
I
availability.
don't think it's the facilities aren't there for games, I don't think.
Yeah, right.
It definitely as a practice field,
So I guess maybe where the board has an interest is they just want to know that if they invest in this field, that people aren't going to say, no, this is an Enosburg field, that this
Yeah.
merged board.
let me, if I can go back, to the Little League and to the, to me, I mean, I certainly don't see why it couldn't be, used for, an overflow if it's needed. But, I mean, even, I think, like I said, the Little League, that is their only field, so, but they're, yeah. So I can go back and kind of, and feel those people out and get back to Lynn, I guess, maybe? Or Morgan, or.
Okay.
Do you think that Little League would know, like you said, that Little League Little League and minor league don't generally start until 5 or 6. I think that part of that question is like how much could it potentially be available for middle and high schools to practice on?
I can look at what their schedule was last year. I mean, that would give me an indication. And I can talk to Shyla. She's kind of the new Shauna of Little League, Shyla Wills. And I can kind of ask her and get an idea that way.
Okay. Do you want to just put this on your agenda for the next meeting and we'll get that information from Shauna?
When is the next meeting, just so I...
January 9th.
January 9th.
Okay, yeah, I can send her a message. So the question is, what, realistically, what's the availability to either school, honestly?
Right.
Okay, that's fair.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you guys, I appreciate it. Very interesting meeting.
Okay, any other future agenda items? Okay. All right, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn then, if there's something else.
I'll make a motion.
Who's made the motion? Elijah's on there. Oh, Elijah?
Aye.
Go ahead.
I'm all good.
Aye.
Devin?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Thank you.